Tracy, I sent you the link.
Alrighty. Didn't come through yet. There it is. Okay, let me just go check, make sure it is working. Okay, you're good to go.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so if you might want to introduce everybody and tell us that you're a member or if you're here as a guest. And I don't see any guests on, but I just want to make sure everybody knew we have some guests coming on. They'll be in the public session. However, they will not go into executive session, but they will be part of any discussion you have in public, such as the rules changes. So you're on, Ms. Darby.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. A meeting of the Louisiana State Board of Medical Examiners, Occupational Therapy Advisory Committee, pursuant to lawful notice, is duly convened and called to order at 10:03, Friday, March 10th, 2023, via Zoom virtual video. Please note any comments by the public are welcome and can be emailed to publiccomment@lsbme.la.gov. Dr. Van, please confirm that you have verified the identity of all tele and video conference participants.
At this time, everybody is identified and part of the committee or
Thank
staff.
you. Is the sound clear and audible to the public and those on tele and video conference?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Yes.
Okay. All additions to the executive or public agenda must be made presently, as we will no longer make additions to the agenda after the close of the public session. To review the mission of the OT Advisory Committee is ultimately to protect the public, that is the consumers of occupational therapy services, by regulating competent practice and upholding the standard set forth by the governing rules and regulations. We will now go forth with introductions. I'm Darby Philbert, the chair.
I'm Ingrid Frank, the co-chair.
I'm Carolyn Murphy.
Kelly Brandon.
Brenda Martin.
Amy Lyrevier.
Glenn Wallace.
Kim, are you still on?
Yes, I'm sorry, I did. Yes, Kim Solari, member.
Okay, and Raylena sent me an email, text saying that she's trying to sign in, but it's saying the meeting hasn't started yet. So she's going to try to sign in from her phone.
And we have we are welcoming a guest today, Miss Elise Kelone. If I say that wrong, please correct me. Welcome, Miss Elise.
Hi, thanks. Elise Cologne, pretty close. Thanks for the welcome.
Hello, Elise.
Hi, Elise.
Okay. It looks like we also have Patricia Wilson.
I'm here.
Tracy Morrow. And Olivia Belong.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here. And I'll resend Raylena a link again for this meeting.
Okay. I'll let her know. Thank you.
And
Okay.
I'm Susie Allen, Research and Education Staff from the board.
Thank you,
And I'm
Sue.
Vince Collard, Executive Director of the board.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, Ingrid, can you just confirm that we have a quorum, please?
Yes, we do have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Okay, if everyone can look at the minutes from the meeting on February 10th, 2023. I do have one question in section G under old business for the rules and regulations and update.
If I could share my screen, I will show the minutes.
Okay, thank you.
They're enabling my share. Just a minute.
You're now co-host, Dr. Van.
Thank you. Okay, I know you said on the item number 5.
Yes.
Old business was number 3. That's why I was confused.
Oh yeah, right there under G, wait, I think it's, yes, G. Where there's a dot that says Brenda Martin motion to approve the above changes. I think that's supposed to be section 4917 because we did vote on that section.
Well,
It is.
that's what it says, section 4917 A through E. And Brenda motioned it and you seconded it. So
Yeah,
that's this is the 4913 and that's where it should be changed, correct?
yes,
Okay.
Wait, what? Hold on.
Okay. Under G, it starts off as section 4917 A through E.
Yeah,
But when you go to Brenda's motion, it says 4913 C, and we will correct that to mean section 4917 A through E.
correct.
So my staff will correct that in the revised minutes.
thank you.
Any other corrections before you approve?
Anyone else have anything? I mean, I've only read them 20 times, but you know, just caught that. So sorry for the late edit.
No problem. You would need a motion to accept.
Okay, so I can get a motion to accept the rules as amended.
Wait, motion to accept the minutes.
I mean, the minutes. I'm sorry.
I move to accept the minutes as amended.
A second.
Second, was that Kim?
Kelly.
Kelly?
Okay. All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone abstain? Okay. The next item on the agenda would be the rules and regulations. However, we do have agenda items for the executive session. So if everyone is okay with it, while we have Susie Allen with us, we'd like to move into the executive session. If everyone's okay with that, and Elise, this just means that we have to go into a session that is not open to the public, but we will return. when we're
Okay,
finished.
thank you for the heads up.
Yeah, I don't really have a way to contact you when we return, but if you just want to like hang out for a little bit, then when we're back, it'll.
At least we're going to move and you can stay put.
Sounds easy enough. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And all of those are moving. Click your blue stop to stop and join.
Gracie, I'm going to leave you outside of the executive session, so you'll stay here as well.
That's fine.
At least they will be finished very soon with the executive session, just to let you know.
All right, appreciate that.
So I'm leaving because we just had some business to attend to pertaining to something that I'm doing with them. So I'm out of here, but they will all rejoin you, I suspect, very shortly.
All right. Thank you, Susie. Appreciate the heads up.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Darby, I think we're all back.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to readjust now that I have two monitors and power. Okay. All right, so if y'all are okay with it, we are now finished the executive session. For those of you in the public that would like to rejoin us, I propose that we take care of some of the new business before we go into the rules changes, if everyone's okay with that. It should be pretty brief. I just wanted to remind y'all, you should have received an email that there's another state regulatory webinar reminder, that there's another webinar on driving connected care and telehealth through public policy. And that's going to be on March 16th from 3 to 4. Did y'all get an email about that? Are y'all aware about that?
I did not get that.
You didn't? Okay. I'll make a note to forward that to everyone. I asked them to include y'all, but I can't tell whether or not you're included. So if you want to mark your calendar in case you're interested. So usually what they do is it's a live webinar and you can ask questions, but then they will also send a link to look at it after.
Is that from AOTA or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like they're starting to happen more and more frequently, and it's just on a bunch of different topics, like the last one that Ingrid and I think Caroline, you were in the last one. So did you get notice about this one?
No, I was just looking through my personal email to see if it came there.
Okay.
I haven't.
Okay, well, I'll forward that to you. So I'm glad I put that reminder in there just because I want y'all to be aware. And if you're interested to, I may not be able to go to all of them. So March 16th from 3 to 4 p.m. is when the next one is, and I'll get that email out to everyone. And then just some LOTA updates very quickly. Glenn had mentioned something about this, but Jennifer and I, the LOTA president, tried to have consistent communication. And we had a discussion about a week ago about their updates. She informed me that LOTA is introducing the telehealth bill just to ensure payment and due to some reimbursement issues, and also moving forward with the OT compact this session. So both of those they're putting through this legislative session. And basically that impacts us just specifically with the rules. She's well aware that we're updating the rules and regs. And so just to know that they are putting that through this session. So that's the telehealth bill and the OT compact. So
why do we need a telehealth bill? Is the one that we have now not working well enough?
So basically she said, like, once the state of emergency ended, that it did change some reimbursement things that made it not quite clear cut. And so that some practitioners and companies are having trouble with reimbursement. And that if we had a bill that laid out the specifics, that there would be no issue with reimbursement. And so they've, talked to other states to see how they're handling it. And basically, the only way to make things not ambiguous for billing is to have the bill that goes through. So, I'll be in contact with them as far as the things that will potentially impact the rules and regs or things that we need to address. I don't think it's much different at this point, so I don't know that there'll be much change, but it's really just to ensure payment and reimbursement. But obviously it will, some of the things for supervision may need some more guidance in the rules. The second thing is on March 31st is March 31st and April 1st is the LOTA conference in New Orleans. And they're going to have a panel at the conference with Sean from NBCOT, Chuck Wilmarth from AOTA to discuss the compact. And they've asked me to sit on this panel, just not to present, but just to be part of the participation there. And also asked that I be there and able to discuss any questions, make any announcements during the business meeting on Saturday, April 1st. And so at that point, basically, we have no changes in the rules, but I will mention CE broker and we'll mention the rules and ethics quiz that, will be an option for people, but down the line, once the rules get adopted, may be required. So it's really just an update. I think we're just trying to have LOTA is trying to have a little bit more presence with everyone, work in collaboration. And it'll be a good chance for the NBCOT and AOTA for the compact to know that, we're there and it's not going to change anything we do, but basically, we're all working together on that. And Jennifer is also trying to get a meeting. We haven't been able to settle on a date yet. They had one meeting and some people from LOTA were involved with Elizabeth Duncan, who is an OT with the Department of Ed, specific to school-based therapy. They've asked me to, again, attend this meeting so that they can, from what I understand, that they want to bring up some comments or suggestions for rules changes for school system therapy. So they're still trying to work. I know y'all remember, when they were considering putting the bill through so that they didn't require a referral. And so they're trying to work on things with that, with the rules and school system and get things through the Department of Ed so that we can do that in a way that's going to help the school system therapist. So I agreed that, if we can agree on a date that I can meet with them and talk to them. Obviously, whatever they tell me, I'll bring back to y'all for suggestions for the rules. But I think it's just to kind of clean things up for school system, and it gives us a chance to hear the issues that they're dealing with in the school system. So I know, Brenda, you've been really good about bringing up some things, but I don't have any idea what else they have in mind, but this is a great way for us to find out and really work with them so that we can help them. And then the last thing that Jennifer asked is, most of the time when the practitioners send questions to us, more than likely, the practitioners go to LOTA first. And then LOTA says, hey, that's a question for OTAC. So I know Kelly can probably see, and Ingrid, when all those emails get forwarded, they were once from LOTA and then they get to us. Sometimes they go straight to Kelly, but there's always this long string that comes from LOTA. So what Kelly has asked is if there was any way that once we send responses, we can CC them. So before we talk about that, Dr. Van, I see that you have your hand up for a question.
No, I just wanted to tell you that the bill has been filed. It's
Okay.
HB 41, and that's for the payment for telehealth. It's been filed.
Okay.
HB 41 by Representative Larry Freeman.
And what about the compact? Has that been?
Don't see that I'm going to look in the Senate because that's probably going to come from one of the senators who's a big person on that kind of stuff. So I'm looking for that right now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so basically what Jennifer's trying to do is with their communication in the LOTA newsletter that's electronic, is because not just because they're presented to LOTA, but because she feels like it's good information for the practitioners that when these questions are answered by us, that they're also made aware of it so that they can share to the members. So, I said I'd bring it to the committee. I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea. I said it, a lot of times we have to consult with our legal department, and, I gave her the process of answering these questions, that it's not really my opinion, our opinion, it's not legal advice, like went through the whole thing and made it clear that that would have to be included. But they're basically trying to do like a frequently asked questions, and then LOTA never sees the results of those questions that go to them. So she was throwing out, is there any way that they could be CC'd on that? So Elise, I see that you have your hand up. Do you have a question or a comment?
I do. I have a question. It's just it's probably because I wasn't here for prior meetings. What's the timeline you guys have in place for finalizing the changes to the rules?
Dr. Van, you want to answer that, or you want me to?
So it's a process that begins with the finalization by the advisory committee of what they want the rules to look like, Ms. Elise. And then it goes, when they're finished, when the advisory committee has finished their recommendations, it then goes to the board, and the board accepts, rejects, or modifies. And then we start the process of the state rulemaking, which involves public notice, hearing, a review by the AG's office, a re-notification, final notification, a possible oversight hearing, approval by the governor, all of which takes a certain amount of time. And of course, at any way along the way, with the public sessions of the board meeting, people can make comment, or you can make comment at this time for the advisory committee. So that's pretty much the process. And once it's finalized here and we start, usually it's 6 months to 8 months to get it finalized through the state.
And Elise, just so that you know, is that what's happened in the past is smaller sections of the rules have been modified and then recommended, but because the rules and regs have not been updated as a whole for a very long time, meaning more than 10 years since I've been a part of this committee, we've decided to make recommendations for the entire document. And so the committee that you're currently seeing has worked last year. We had some glitches because of COVID and not being able to have meetings via Zoom until later in the year. But as of this year, which is my last term and also Brenda Martin's last term, we've been on this together this will be our sixth year. We are meeting every month, so that my goal is to finish the rules and have the recommendations to the board by the end of this year. So that's a pretty hefty goal, and everyone that you see on this meeting right now have been meeting monthly, and then last year every other month-ish for 5 to 6 hours at a time to work on the rules. So we know it's a long and strenuous process, but we are all really trying to weed through every little thing to make these changes.
Awesome. Well, that's helpful. So the goal for you guys, end of 2023, and then obviously there's no guaranteed timeline after that, but OTAC's recommendation. by
Yeah,
end
I
of the
mean, our
year.
hope is what Dr. Van said, like the 6 to 8 month-ish, trying to be realistic by the time like we have public comments and, we're really trying to look at like AOTA standards of practice. We're also waiting for their finalized document on things like dry needling and, other adjunctive therapy techniques. Like we're trying to be inclusive. The other thing that we're also trying to do to avoid this in the future is update the rules to say that every so often, maybe every 3 years, that the rules have to be updated because there's nothing in the rules currently. And so then when we go to do this and they haven't been updated in so long, it takes much longer and it's much more work. So
Yeah. Thank y'all for doing this overhaul. It's pretty impressive.
It's a pretty massive undertaking, but it's so needed. So yeah. So just to kind of get back to it, Ella, what are y'all's thoughts about communicating? I don't even know if it's legally possible. I guess that's a question for Ms. Wilson and Dr. Van of sharing those comments with LOTA, or I just kind of wanted to get y'all's thoughts of what you think about that.
Pat, you want to go first?
Sure. So whatever document we produce, whatever letter we send, it's going to be a matter of public record. That's not my concern. But we also don't generally publish individual responses with names and so forth and personal details. So I think it would be more on a case-to-case basis as opposed to a standard instruction to staff that whenever you all send a response, it automatically gets CC'd to the association. That would be my concern, is just maybe not every question is appropriate if it's a question involving an individual circumstance and someone's personal information and so forth.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I feel like if it's a interpretation of the rules kind of question, a general supervision question, which we do kind of get often, but yeah, I mean, that's a good point about the individual responses with people's names who asked. I don't think that that's appropriate to share.
And I certainly think you all will know, since you're the process that we have set up with you all so deeply ingrained in getting the question, making the agreeing on a recommended response, and then we just review it to just say, yeah, this looks like something the board would want to say. If you're aware that your email stream or whatever did come, like this person or this situation did come from LOTA, then within your discretion, I don't see any reason why you can't just give them a heads up that this was the response. But if it wasn't something like that, if it was an individual question that somebody reached out to you to, maybe we would exercise the discretion not to do that, at least not without asking the person if they are okay with it.
Okay. Any other comments on that or thoughts? Okay, and the last thing that Jennifer had asked is if we were willing and able to share the list of practitioner contacts with LOTA. So basically they're trying to improve their communication and have asked for email contacts of all the practitioners in the state.
Darby, traditionally the board sells that list, but not with emails. It sells a hard address, if you will, list, a contact for all the licensees upon request. And they would just have to submit that request to myself and Tracy, and I will get it together. Tracy usually processes those. Tracy, we still don't send email addresses, do we?
That is correct.
Right.
So it would just be mailing address and?
Yes, mailing addresses.
Okay.
And it would only be as good as the data that's in our database that they give us on renewal.
Dr. Van?
Yeah.
The addresses that we give out to the public is their whatever they chose to be their public address.
Right.
So
So if they
it could
give
be
us their
their
public
business
address-
address, correct,
Whatever they say is the public address, we give out.
correct.
If they don't give us a public address, we don't have one. If they give us their home address as their public address, they get their home address out.
Right. Most of the time, it's the business address.
Yeah, okay. And we had that discussion because I remember when I was president of LOTA, we actually purchased the list multiple times, but that's when we did everything by mail. So I wasn't sure if it was updated to email addresses, but I will relay that information to Jennifer. And that is all of the updates from LOTA, unless Glenn, you have something else that I didn't touch on. I know that you had mentioned something earlier about being in contact with Jennifer about the
No, that was it. I was just thinking that if we, as the board, were going to, like, you know, email people about something, it just looks like good PR from LOTA's standpoint to also be able to put a LOTA, you know, a LOTA logo on it and say, hey, this has been done by OTAC. Just something to include within a newsletter or something like that, just to try and help grow the push for staying confident and staying up to date and participating in the, you know, field of OT for Louisiana. So that was it.
okay. Elise, did you have another comment?
I did. It's actually piggybacking off of Wallace's comment, but I was just curious of how physical addresses seem quite a bit dated as a way to communicate in real time. In the year of 2023, I do feel like email addresses would be a much more true, effective way to deliver information. How would we get that process updated to the paid list, including the emails?
If I may, Darby,
Yes, please.
this has been a long-standing board policy, Ms. Elise. And I think if the advisory committee for PAs would like to release that, we could, for the PAs, we could go to the board and ask the board to do that. If they say no, they say no. If they say yes, we would release it just for the PAs. But again, that would really be the board's decision and not the advisory committee's decision. It would be a recommendation. The question is, do you want people to know your email addresses and that kind of stuff? And that dates back to the early days of email. And Pat, you might want to comment.
Yeah, I think similar to what public employees have the ability to do with respect to their personal information. I don't know anything about LOTA. I don't know how many practitioners are members or whether they all are. I have no idea. But I think there is, especially in Louisiana, there is a sense of a person being able to keep their information to the extent possible. They're able to keep their information private. And so I think that if they have not designated their email address as a public piece of information, it would be difficult for the board to overrule that decision. So it's just, we'd have to take a look at that.
I know this is a bigger topic, but I guess I agree with Elise that it feels as if it's time, I guess, for the board in general to include on the form a spot, you know, public physical address, public email address, so that, you know, that could also be part of what's sold. If somebody chooses to disclose a public email address on the form, but I think there would have to be a place on the form that requests that.
No, it's on the form for doctors. I will check to be sure it's not. I think it's on the form for you too. I can put my public email address and my public office address, but if you don't put anything, we normally do not, we have traditionally not sold the email address on the board's recommendation, but I don't have any problem with you recommending if they have listed it as public, taking it to the board and say the OTs would like to be able to get the list of all of the OT email addresses, and they can say no, or they can say yes.
Okay, yeah.
So I guess I have a question with that. If that is allowed, then would that also allow outside entities to purchase that list?
Anybody can purchase that list.
Right, that's
Right.
the issue, that once we say that's public information, you know, I don't know how many of y'all get unsolicited emails from marketing and listservs and all that, but I think that is something that needs to be considered.
Because I know historically and possibly even now, like that's how a lot of the CE companies get your information. So they go to the licensing, they purchase the thing, and then that's how you get the mail for all the continuing ed courses. Because that's, you know, how LOTA used to operate for their conferences, is we would buy the list and then mail out the conference brochure. So if, you know, that's just something to consider, that if we allow it to, or recommend it to be public, that people would need to be aware that the list can be purchased from anyone, not just LOTA. So it's not just something to leave LOTA in, but it would be public, meaning anyone. So I don't know what y'all's thoughts are on there, if y'all would like to
I guess,
recommend that, or
I guess I have another question for Dr. Mann and Patricia. Let's assume that the current OT form has a spot on there that somebody listed an email that they consider to be their public email. Can we request that the LSBME sell that data only to the LOTA?
No.
No,
okay.
I'm looking at my own profile and I don't see a spot for public email address, but I have my public address there, but I could be overlooking something.
Well, it would be at renewal when you fill in the spot and you update it. If you don't update it, you leave it blank. You may not see it in your profile.
I gotcha. Thank you for that.
But you can go in your profile and update a lot of stuff anytime you want, or you can send something to licensing to add your public email address to your public listing, and they'll do that for you.
Okay, are there any other comments? Dr. Van, would you be able to check to see if there's any other public comments on the LOTA update, please?
1 second.
Thank you.
And there are no public comments.
Okay. All right, so at this time, I'd say let's get, if we could share the screen with Ingrid and go to the rules and regs update. The last section that we updated would be the 49, what was it, 17?
Let me see if I have screen sharing. Yes, I do. So here it is. Can everyone see the rules? Do I have it up?
Yeah, I can see them.
Okay, great. All right, so we had ended last at 49:17, where we discussed discontinuation of services, and we finished that. So our next section is 49:19, quality assurance and service competency. This is not an area that Darby or I have moved forward and had done anything on. So we're starting from scratch here together. Make it a little bit bigger.
Hey, Ingrid, I was just reading through what you had sent, and going back to 1979.
1979.
Yeah, it's on up there.
Okay, yeah, it might be way up there.
Let's see.
Carolyn, what
Page
section?
13, I think.
What section are we looking for again? Oh, 1979. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Except to continuing professional ed requirements.
Yes. Okay. Hang on. 2, it says an occupational therapist practitioner. So you see it, go back up.
Okay.
All right, 1979A2,
Mhm.
an occupational therapist practitioner. Shouldn't that be occupational therapy practitioner?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely. And also for things like edits like this, one thing that we have to build into our timeline is the fact that even after, as the OTAC, we have come to an agreement on all of the changes. I think it could take like up to 2 months for Darby and I to like go back through and edit for grammar, spelling, formatting. And we also have to make sure that all of the old language is still there so that when we bring it to LSBME, you know, they can see what the old language is and what we changed it to.
Do you need to make that green, or I don't know, what do you need to make it?
Yes, let me make that green.
Well, and the other thing, like, as I've gone back to look things up, I've also noted other areas like we did today that like, oh, we didn't address that. So like, I've kind of already started that process of making an outline of like, what's done, what's not, what we have to go back and do. So,
I mean, we need to go back to the temp license. I don't know if we want to do that now since we've had this discussion. Should we do the temp license now?
I know, I kind of feel like we're marking things and I'd rather just kind of get through it because I think there's going to be like a whole nother like go through. If y'all are okay with that, unless y'all have like really strong opinions about that. But I mean, because there are other things where you've added the stuff with Kentucky, and I remember you putting things in back up there that we have to go back and deal with.
Well, that's stuff we haven't gotten to yet. That's about, well, no, use of the title of doctor. Rules review every so often.
I think we just sort of get through the one week and then we'll go back because there's definitely other sections that I've noted like, hey, we need to go back and look at this again. And then we're also going to have to consider like the compact and things like that. So, yeah. But thank you for that, Carolyn. I don't like we just find things here and there.
All right, with first up under quality assurance and service competency with letter A, we right here already have a discrepancy because here it says that the OT shall periodically, which means every 2 weeks, or 6th visit, whichever comes first, because that's the definition of periodically in this document, review all aspects of individual OT programs for effectiveness and efficiency. Then later, when we start getting into settings and whatnot, there's 3 settings where it says that the OT only has to update every month or 6th visit, whichever comes first. So, do we want to have a definition of what we mean by how often an OT needs to review the effectiveness of their program?
What's it? I think I would go back to looking at is there any suggestions from the standards of practice?
Yeah.
Wasn't that covered in the reeval section?
I know, I was just thinking that too.
Was it covered in the reeval? Did we already decide this?
Well, I just remember there being a question about this from someone. You know, we were talking about how often they should do a reeval, but the reeval didn't necessarily mean it had to be a formal reevaluation. But then we talked about the wording of how often you should be looking back at the plan to make sure that it was appropriate. And we put in some wording, but I don't know. I'm trying to find the section.
So I'm going back. So we have referral, then we have evaluation, and then we had intervention process, and then we have discontinuation. We took out the section of implementation, and I thought we had a section of reval, but dreaming. So maybe it's under evaluation, Kelly. I remember the conversation that you're talking about though.
I'm looking at the standards of practice right now.
Okay. We talk about modifying the intervention plan, review and modification, but we don't mention the word reevaluation that I can see. I think we talked about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I've just finished reading all of the standards of practice, and they don't actually address anything like, certainly they don't address any timeframes on how often an OT should review their program, and doesn't even really specify anything about modifying the program. I mean, it says an OT modifies the intervention plan throughout the intervention process.
Yeah.
That's how they phrase it.
Well, I
And
think
documents the changes in the client's needs, goals, and performance.
So I think that's sort of the new language. So we took out in section 4915D, we took out that whole section that said periodically reevaluate and document the occupational performance and performance skills. But what we did do is under section 4913 under intervention process 3C, which I don't think it's supposed to be C, I think it's actually supposed to be 4. But intervention plan review and modification is that we review and modify the intervention plan throughout the intervention process, assessing effectiveness and documenting changes, needs, goals, and performance, and then modifying the plan. So I think that was where we had that discussion, Kelly, about like,
Yeah.
in our minds, that's sort of the reeval process, but we don't want to say it has to be like standardized or a certain time frame or
Right.
but again, it's up for discussion.
Well, then do we even need A? We've already addressed it under intervention plan.
Well, I think we have to look at all this because I
mean, do we need
4919?
4919A, because we're trying to streamline this. We've already basically, everything that's in 4919A, we already said right here.
I think, yeah, but a lot of this is, a lot of it, like even B, like.
Yeah, and B, both.
If we look down, let's see, I just missed it. On the next page, 22. 4925. D1, it talks about reevaluation. And I'm not sure if it's the same context.
Looks like that's about supervision of a CODA.
Yeah, that's specific to assistance. So this section is really just the quality assurance and service competency, which it looks like we embedded a lot of it. We just have to go through A, B, C and make sure we've touched on all of like each one of these.
Yeah, I think A and B is kind of repetitive because this is more related to service competency of the OT and OTA relationship, not necessarily. I mean,
so B talks about like efficacy, using research and theory. Have we touched on that in the
I think we did that in the
intervention process?
Like using best evidence?
Yes. Yes, under B, intervention plan development.
Yep.
Intervention shall be based on evaluation, client goals and outcomes, best available evidence.
Yeah.
And professional clinical. I just don't want to take stuff out and be like, well, we never really put that back in.
Okay. So how about C? I haven't.
So that's saying the OT supervising and assistant must have performed and documented a service competency on the occupational therapy assistant. The occupational therapist must have previously evaluated and or treated any client being seen by an occupational therapy assistant he or she is supervising. in addition, 1, initial service competency, 2, annual service competency, 3, documentation of service competency, 4, more than 1 therapist, 5 is different clinics, and then D is what the therapist, that they're responsible for compliance with AOTA supervision guidelines.
All right, so this is all stuff we have not touched on yet.
Right, but this is all really, I mean, I feel like this section is more about supervision and.
Have we not? I mean, I recall having discussions about a lot of this. So was this, or was this not addressed in another supervision section somewhere?
Not this service competency specifically. This is the only place where the service competency is addressed.
We talked about the supervision in relationship to coming up with the intervention plan, developing the plan and modifying the plan. And documenting that.
Like what the roles and responsibilities are for both, I think.
Yeah, but I kind of feel like this quality assurance and service competency is really more appropriate for the section under supervision of assistance, especially because A and B we've already done.
I agree. This whole thing should be a subsection of starting here at 4925.
Yeah.
Supervision of occupational
just read through this and figure out what exactly it's saying to see if it's repetitive in 4925 or if it needs to be added to.
And service competency, when it says service competency to administer all OT services which are to be performed. Is this above and beyond entry level?
Wait, ask your question again. You're under
Well, it just says, when it says all OT services which are to be performed. I don't know. It just is a big.
What number are you on?
C1.
Oh, okay, C1. So.
I don't know. Have y'all done service competency or completed it on an OTA before?
If let's say I worked with an OT assistant in a hand therapy clinic, and obviously making a dynamic hand splint would not be considered entry level. But if we're both working in a hand therapy clinic and it's expected of the OT assistant, and then I would need to do a service competency to make sure they knew how to make a dynamic hand splint.
Right.
So it's all of the expected interventions for the setting. Or as it's phrased here, any of interventions that are going to be administered under that OT's supervision and direction. So it's not every intervention in the world, it's every intervention that OT is going to be expecting.
So maybe we can just relate it back to the plan.
Isn't this an annual review on this competency?
It
Yeah,
is.
that's number
Okay.
2.
Maybe there should have be something that if something changes and an additional skill comes in, it has to be revised.
Yeah, number 1 talks about the initial service competency. So say that first time the assistant's going to work with you ever. And then number 2 talks about the annual requirements. So in theory, that annual competency should be capturing any new skills that would be expected to be performed by that assistant. That's how we've always taught it.
However, if 3 months after it's been done, at the annual date, we've added a new
Intervention.
service. Doesn't that need to be checked off as a competency item versus waiting 9 more months?
Kind of
Right.
like when you change it, something happens after the initial evaluation, like a significant change, they need to be.
But I think Kim's question's related specifically to the treatment. So like if
Okay.
you do a competence, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, like if you do a competence check with the assistant and then decide to revise and do a different sort of type of treatment, then you'd have to revise the competency on that different treatment style or technique,
Correct.
but not wait to the annual.
Correct.
So I'm trying to think of an example, but I'm having trouble, but yeah, so. And I guess that's what the all means that Kelly was asking about, that like, because you modify the treatment, your intervention plan, as you modify the plan, you also have to check the competency of the
Assistant.
assistant based on your changes.
Right. I don't think we should think of initial service competency as being one point in time. Initial service competency is for any new intervention that comes up that needs to be checked off at any point in time.
Mhm. Yeah, but the initial, the way it's worded is basically like you accept the responsibility. So I think there were some issues in the past of like UT saying like, I don't feel competent in like having an assistant, but then the company is requiring them to. So like there has to be a point at which you agree to it.
Uh-huh.
And so you have to accept that responsibility, and then here's what you're responsible for. And then I agree with you, Ingrid, that it needs to have language so that it's ongoing and not like one point in time.
Mm-hmm. I see. Because of these words, following acceptance of responsibility to supervise.
Yeah, that sort of makes it sound like it's
Like
just
it's
that
just
one
one
addition.
point in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like these are looking at a gross competency, not individual treatment plans. So typically companies are using a competency that's appropriate for their setting. So if that company decided to provide some type of skill set or expected their assistants to provide it and it wasn't on that sheet, then they would need to update their entire competency list for every one working there, if I had to guess.
Is really not about the company. If I, as an occupational therapist working for a big SNF company, go on some continuing ed and come back with some new intervention, and I want the coder to do it too, then it's up to me. That's what this says. It's my responsibility to create a service competency and check the coda off on it. It doesn't really matter what my job is telling me I have to do.
In real life, is that what's happening?
I can't, I don't know. I know I created one or two when I worked at St. Margaret's Daughters, but I don't know what other people are doing.
When I worked at the hospital here, we had a competency thing that, we kind of updated every year depending on the equipment that we had or any kind of techniques that we were using. And so that was updated and assessed each year or whenever it needed to be.
That's another good example, Carolyn. If a new piece of equipment gets purchased.
I only asked that question because for the benefit of the consumer, having these things as clear as possible to the clinicians and having them where it's real life, being able to implement them, and there's ways to ensure compliance overall is going to make the most sense. My experience, I don't see any occupational therapists ever creating individual competency lists that are utilized and tracked solely by that OT, typically whoever they're working under, and maybe they're an independent contractor, so they have to house this themselves, but that's going to be housed and standardized somewhere where usually HR teams are tracking this information, so that if we're ever audited or whatnot, that information can be pulled and easily checked off on whether or not it's met like we're in compliance with what's required. So especially considering lots of times assistants are utilized by more than one OT. And I know that they go into that, like what happens when more than one OT is supervising the same assistant, what happens then. So just that's the questions I imagine coming up in the future. Same with, like, you brought up that awesome point with the periodically definition. Like, I feel like that is a question we get asked a million times because it's so inconsistent. It's not black and white of what's required. One place it says periodically, it's defined there. In the evaluation section, it's defined, including the word periodically, but then in other settings, it seems a little bit like flashing information.
Which part in the evaluation or the OT process does it talk about if there's a significant change in the client as compared to the initial evaluation, then they must be reevaluated? Where's that section? Because I didn't know if that wording could somehow align with this, because I think that's what we're saying is it's kind of like an IEP. You do that annually unless you need to meet again prior to. So we need to have something along those lines that says it's done annually, but it's up to the OT and OTA or the OT, I guess, to initiate a modification of the service competency if additional services are included or additional skills are required. But I do know that it is mostly, from what I've seen, facility directed, a standard form.
So I'm looking, Kelly, to answer your question, up where we have the plan review and modification. And it's not really mentioned in there. But
I thought it used to say it.
No, it did, but I think it was a different section. Give me a second. I'm going to try to look up somewhere else that I think I might have.
Are you talking about if a patient has had a turn for the worse, that there's
or any kind of change that's different
any kind of change that they're not supposed to treat? Is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Well,
or they have to be reevaluated, or you have to
Right.
consult back. I know it's in here somewhere.
I can find it. It would be, I know where. Give me a second. I'll
Feels like that's a different thing than the service competency. Like we're getting a little off track.
Well, it has
it's
the
on
same premise. Like
it's under 4925. It's number 3 under D.
An OTA shall not administer OT to a client whose status differs substantially from that identified by the individual program plan.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, what I'm saying is that idea is the same. Like, even though they're not required to do a new evaluation or revert back to that, it called for a change. It called for an
additional competency to be
assigned to, it was a prompt action.
Right. Personally, I feel like the fact that it says that the OT's service competency to administer all OT services which are to be performed under their direction, that to me does imply that this is an ongoing thing. But if it's unclear, then let's.
I think the annual part is what it might need a little extra.
Or I think just inserting the word ongoing. like even in that last sentence, the service competency is designed to document that. I mean, it should somewhere in there.
Skill set.
Yeah, I mean, I know that it's under initial, but I think what seems to be the theme is like there has to be a place between initial and annual for an ongoing, just like Kim had brought up, like in case something happens in the interim, or, you know, Kelly, like you were saying, like an IEP change or something. Like, I mean, it could be based on the client's performance, but it could also be based on something like a new piece of equipment, or, you know.
What, and number 3, C3, where it says documentation of service competency, initial and annual competency, should we put something about ongoing in there? I don't know.
So in theory, right, if you assessed an assistant or performed a competency and you deem them unfit to perform a certain skill, or they decided they did not feel competent to provide that skill, then I would think as the supervisor, if you change a care plan when you know that that assistant's providing care to your patient, and you changed up your care plan to include a skill that you've not deemed that assistant to be fit, you'd have to take them off the care plan unless you have something documented saying that they are competent to provide that skill. So is that assumed? Like, that's kind of my interpretation. So if it's on the initial competency that they're not supposed to be providing that skill, and you haven't updated that competency until the annual time to do so, then you should not have that assistant providing that intervention unless you've got an updated competency saying otherwise.
That's right.
That's correct. I mean, they could technically still see that patient, but they cannot perform that intervention.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Should we add another section? Just, I mean, annual service competency, we could, you know, kind of include that in there, the ongoing, but should there just be another section inserted about
Dr. Van?
change?
Like,
Dr. Van has a comment.
oh,
I just want to tell you that I'm going to have to leave at 1 o'clock. So I just want to let you know. We got plenty of time, but I just wanted to tell you.
okay, thank you.
So Carolyn, you think like maybe between the initial and the, are we going to move this section to under the supervision assistant? I mean, are we keeping it here? I feel like it's kind of ambiguous, just kind of lingering here, but unless we really address the competency of, like, A and B are really just about the therapist, but we said that we've already included that in other sections. And so then if we take those out, then this all becomes primarily part of the assistance. And then we just need to integrate these thoughts into this. And that's where maybe we can make it a little bit more congruent with an ongoing statement.
Darby, if I might interject, Elise was getting very close to what we do here in the agency. If we don't go out and audit people right now in this regard.
Right.
But if we were to get a complaint about an OTA, that some procedure was done and there was a problem, the first thing we would look to is the supervising OT and that document that says they had that competency. If it's not there, then there's going to be 2 people that are in trouble, not just one. So again, sometimes they have to be updated more than once a year. They have to be updated to keep the person's competence verification, updated to what's actually happening in the practice. So this is designed to protect the public. So the key here is, how are you going to protect the public? And what do you think is the best way to protect the public, to make sure that somebody who doesn't know how to do something or somebody who has not been taught properly how to do something is not doing it. Think of it that way.
Okay, what if it says, instead of making a whole new number where it says annual service competency, what if it just says,
Current clinical
updated service
competency would work.
competencies or something like that, and it says, following such an initial evaluation, the supervising OT shall thereafter conduct and document a service competency to determine whatever the skill set, as additional skills are required and or annually, whichever is first. Something, something along those lines. It's just, you have to at least do it annually, but that you must do it anytime an additional skill is required. And if it doesn't happen the entire year, then you just do it annually.
That would be fine, but the whole thing is the document should reflect current clinical competence.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the key opportunity to put the language. It doesn't matter when it changes, but the document needs to reflect that it changed. And so you can say the document needs to be updated at least annually or anytime there is a change in the current clinical competence of the OTA.
Yes, that sounded better.
What if we change the word from number 1 to current, from initial, current service competency, following acceptance of responsibility, but prior to utilization, the supervising OT shall get rid of the word initially, evaluate and document, shall thereafter evaluate and document. Or that was a word you used, Kelly, shall thereafter.
I mean, I actually like the initial, because that is a clear, cut and dry. You have to do it before they start the plan. I think that when we have then the next one saying annual, that's what people see. Annual. Okay, I'll do it annually. And don't really look at, oh, well, I need to do it before annually if I need to. So I mean, if it's initial, that's set in stone. You have to do it initially. And then the next one could be current service competency or updating service competency or revisions of service or something like that, where it has a little more
like flexibility, like you have to at minimum annually, but
Minimum
whenever there's a
annually.
change in client status or a modification to the intervention plan or
anytime it's
change
it
in
doesn't
therapy.
reflect whatever Dr. Van said, that sounded good.
Yeah.
Rewind that.
Oh, okay, it feels like we are adding a number 2 to me. I don't know.
I agree that initial word is very clear and cut and dry, and makes that statement, like, I feel like no one can argue that they didn't understand that was required.
Right.
At the beginning.
And then the at minimum annually, and then updated as needed to reflect that the assistant is providing, is confident in the services that they're providing.
Okay.
Dr. Van,
Yes.
your hand's still up. I didn't
Oh,
know.
I'm sorry. I apologize. That's my
Okay.
fault. Please forgive me.
No, that's okay. I'm just
Just saying that you want the ongoing thing included into number 1, or that we want a number 2, like what I've got of ongoing service competency as new interventions are added on which the OTA has not yet demonstrated competency, the OT will blah, blah, blah. Or are we trying to get this into number 1?
I say we're trying to get that in number 2.
I think you're combining ongoing with the annual.
You want to
So
combine.
like annual is the minimum, but ongoing, if there's a change in the client status, a change in the treatment, like if we modify the intervention plan, or
This,
there's
the annual competencies isn't really about a change in the patient status. It's about skills and interventions.
right.
So, okay. So what is exact terminology? Annual service competency, annual and ongoing service competency. Is that what you want me to change it to?
Well, what's a word for not revision, but I don't want to say, I keep saying updates, but that's not what I'm
Modifying.
Review.
No, it's like I'm out of words. It's Friday.
explain what you mean and maybe we can find a word for it. Or give us an example. I mean, I
Well,
feel
like you know, like it's the recheck, it's the update, it's the
Review?
review, yeah, service competency review, or yeah, at least what were you saying?
If we go back to, well, I'm sorry, I'm not Elise.
That's
This is
okay,
Brenda. If
Brenda.
we go back to the title of the section and then maybe call it like annual service competency assurance
But I think we're trying to get away from annual in the heading.
or
Because we're
service.
wanting people to
competency
understand that
assurance.
it's at minimum annual.
So why don't we just say ongoing service competency or current?
Yep. Initial for the first one and either ongoing or current service competency for number 2. And then we could define that further to say at minimum, it has to be updated annually, but also expected to be updated as deemed fit based on the updated, I don't know, as the competency change for those assistants.
I like the word current. I just think that paints a different picture than ongoing does.
Yeah.
I agree.
That it
Yeah,
has to be
that's true.
relevant at this moment.
So we're going to change to, instead of saying annual service competency, to be current. And then put some parameters of like at minimum it's annual, but
What about
I think that you don't even have to put that whole number 2, just change annual in number 3 to current, and then take out thereafter, where it says thereafter annually. Just take out that annually, thereafter conduct at a, you know, and document a service competency, you know, at a minimum of 1 year or whatever Elise said after that.
or no longer than annually.
Yeah, those words.
Current service competency following such initial evaluation, the supervising OT shall thereafter conduct and document a service competency to determine the OT skill set. That's not reading well, right?
Maybe you can say not less often, to be based off of some verbiage we have in other places. Not less often than every 12 months.
It just feels, I understand that we need to have the annual for the, you know, you've got your bed to bedside commode transfer that you're going to test them on, that you're going to do annually. That's one thing. To me, is a different thing that the OT or the OTA, frankly, learns, or both learn a new intervention, and it's a new thing that needs to get added.
Well, keep in mind, all of these assistants should be at entry level. So the basic entry level skills, I would assume, should be demonstrated before you're hiring them. So it almost, are you trying to identify like those advanced skills that you want to make sure are captured somewhere?
That was my initial question that you phrased better.
Because the entry level skills, I would hope, are all should be checking off as yes. So it would just be like something really advanced or special that you're trying to make sure we capture before that's delivered.
You mean with me talking about a new intervention?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you go and, yeah, exactly. You get it, the facility buys a new piece of equipment. And so you're going to make sure that the OTA is competent to use the new piece of equipment before they do. Before they use it.
Okay, so the way that you have it written now, Ingrid, is current service competency
Are you talking about like number 3?
Yeah, because that's what we're trying to adapt, right? And kind of include it all.
I guess so. I'm a fan of having something that implies that as new interventions are added, that you need to, it doesn't matter when it happens.
Yeah. To determine the OTA skill set to reflect.
Or does it have to be added or as new interventions are changed or modified or, because sometimes it may be not added, but it may be changed a different way. Does that make sense? Like you'd be doing something, but now it's, I don't know. I'm trying to.
I mean, the only reason you would need to do a service competency on the CODA is if the intervention is either a whole new novel one or a new piece of equipment that you've never done the competency with them on, or you've changed something like so drastically that you have to do a competency on them. So this is, I mean, we're looking at it from the point of view of their skills, and with an intervention that you want the OTA to use as an OT.
So in the sentence that you have for 3, where it says, following such an initial evaluation, the supervising occupational therapist shall thereafter conduct and document a service competency. And then I think right there is where you stick in your statement, like based on changing client needs, change in intervention strategies, modifications to plans, like, right? Because you're saying like, once you do the initial, then this is the part where you would conduct and document the service competency of new and changing things.
Okay, tell me what's right. I would rather have a 2 and a 3. But if you guys want to try to combine this, it feels like we're trying to put a square hole in a round peg. Like one
So
issue, you're going to have to do an annual. You got to have the annual competency that, at least I think we all agree on that. And a whole other thing is, as new interventions that have never, the CODA has never demonstrated competency on, are added to a client's treatment plan, you need to do a competency.
Can we start with what you just said and then just followed by at least annually?
Right, so that's what she has for number 2. Current service company, as new interventions are added to a client's treatment plan on which the OTA has not been demonstrated competency, the OT will evaluate the OTA prior to the OTA performing.
And then to me, 3 should be the same what we had before. Annual service competency following an initial evaluation of any skill. The supervising OT shall thereafter annually conduct. But if you guys want to try to get these together, someone's gonna have to tell me exactly what to type, because it feels like it's 2 different things to me.
Well, if we keep the 2, then maybe we could just put a statement in there that like can occur anytime between the initial and the annual.
Well, sure. As new interventions are added to a client's treatment plan, that can be any time.
So what if we're adding, so it sounds like it's number 2, so thereafter annually conduct, right? So that's at minimum, we can add a statement that says, or sooner than annually, when necessary, to document the most current or updated, or to document when there's a change in the occupational therapy assistant skill set. How about that? Because we're not documenting the new intervention being provided. We're documenting whether or not the assistant can provide the new skill.
Yeah, the required new skill set.
Yeah, so if it shouldn't be based on an intervention plan, I mean, the OT has to be aware that if the intervention plan that they're implementing cannot be performed by that assistant, then that assistant shouldn't be either seeing that patient, or like Darby said, shouldn't be seeing that patient for that provision of those skills. So I feel like we're narrowing it down to intervention plans versus like looking at the bigger picture of the OT assistant's skill set.
Okay.
Yeah, so the competency would just be related to what you have here, on which the OTA has not different, the OT will evaluate the OTA prior to the OTA performing. I feel like that should have something at the end of it, right?
Or what are you looking at? Number 2 or number 3?
Number 2. So basically what we're saying to include in 2 is to, I feel like the sentence isn't complete at the end, and then to add something that, you know, that this is basically ongoing. And then you have your minimum, given if nothing like changed or was.
So maybe it's just a whole other thing. Service competency assessment is ongoing and should be performed anytime that an intervention.
I don't think it should be performed based on interventions. It should be performed annually or maybe sooner to reflect if there's a change in the CODA's current skill set. Because it's the competency is a reflection of the CODA, not an individual treatment plan.
But if the treatment plan changes, it may require the CODA to become competent.
Yeah, and if the setting changes, then.
Correct,
So
but that's when we would have to capture the updated skill set of the assistant.
Right, which is what number 2 is trying to do. So as interventions are added, or as as things change, we're trying to say that the OTA would have to demonstrate competency in order. That's what 2 is saying, basically. We just don't have it worded correctly. And then 3 would get back to like the minimum being the annual. So, I mean, I guess I need to refer to people who basically do these ongoing competency things of like, at what point do you like, think in your mind of like a scenarios like we've said that sort of come up and how this should be worded to reflect if a new intervention comes, if a new piece of equipment, all those things, when something else has to be done to either teach the CODA something new, how do we reflect that in that this current competency has to be updated in order for that CODA to perform the treatment?
And something about like any, and now I wish I had like highlighters and stuff, like any intervention performed by a CODA must have a current documentation. I'm sorry, I lost my words before I could get them out.
I feel like that. I feel like that's what it already says though. So like the initial service competency sets in stone what this assistant's allowed to provide skill set wise. So you can update it at any point, right? No one says you can't update it sooner than 1 year, but as a supervisor, you've deemed what your assistant can provide. You should not be allowing them to provide any services that you haven't deemed them competent in. Then at minimum, you're updating that annually. But I would assume as a supervisor, if you're,
I'm sorry.
I lost.
Does this make more sense of what I just wrote? For current service competency assessment should be ongoing, assessing new skills that are needed as they arise. And then the number 3 is annual service competency following initial evaluation of any skill or whatever, the supervising OT shall thereafter annually conduct and document competency.
Did it say under 2, service competency assessment of the OT assistant should be ongoing? I mean, I know it's kind of implied, but.
Yeah.
What if you just tacked on to number 2 and performed at minimum annually?
And reassessed and reassessed at least annually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of captures both I think.
That was the original plan before Ingrid was like, I need 2 different ones.
You're right. Now we've managed to get just one. I was wrong.
Okay. I'm like, we don't need all the words, and I mean, at least I agree with you that like, if it should be implied and it should happen, but literally if it's not written in here, then people think like they tend to do the minimum. And so we'll get things that say stuff like, oh, well, the rules only say annual, so we only did it annual, even though things change.
Oh, I see.
We're trying to leave it so that it's gray enough to cover all settings and all situations, but structured enough so that it protects the consumer and upholds like ethically and legally when things, head south.
Yeah, and I love that. The more
So it's,
you're right, it's a challenge getting it clear, but also
Right.
applying across multiple settings. But yes, if that's something that's frequently questioned, then I like
Right.
making it clear so no one
like-
can argue. I didn't know.
Yeah. So like Dr. Van says, when ethical things come up, which, happens when we go into things like the executive session, we have to have a document that basically outlines the protection part of it that's clear enough so that people can't just say like, well, we did it annually, but that wasn't technically enough, but it doesn't say that it has to be ongoing. Because those are the comments that we hear, like, well, we didn't know we had to reevaluate. And it's like, well, it's kind of common sense, but you'd be surprised that if it's not written,
And is there anything, I don't think there is, but like, is there any responsibility stated that if the assistant knows that there's a change in their competency and now they're less able to provide whatever skill they said they can do before, now they're not, are they required to notify their supervising therapist?
I don't think we have that anywhere in the rules right now.
Yeah,
We have it written right now is that might not come to light until the annual.
I don't think so. I'd have to go and look in 4925, like a little bit more detailed.
Are you saying like, I have a question. Are you saying like, let's say the CODA has some kind of physical injury and they can't do a safe transfer? They need
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Because as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, that puts all the responsibility on the supervisor, which makes sense. But at what point is the assistant responsible if they have some type of change and don't communicate that with their supervising therapist? Are we still liable? And how does how do we ensure that the patient's current with that as well?
Part of me thinks it's the facility's responsibility and their policies and procedures that's one of the, that they have to inform management of any change in their physical status or mental status, but I'm not sure how it falls under the supervisor.
Because here
in here that says anything about that, because I just read on.
I didn't think there was, and it's tricky here because we all often work under facilities or employees, but the true rules place the responsibility in the hands of the supervising OT.
Yeah, but if you look at like early intervention settings, there aren't like rules. Dr. Collada?
Remember that there are some of your OTs in rural areas that are more entrepreneurial and own their own business with OTAs that are working under them. So you have to write the rules so it fits all.
Yeah.
And that particular OT would be responsible for any current clinical competence or change in current clinical competence because that's how we protect the patients and the citizens from the board perspective.
Thank you. It looks like this would be the place to put something like that. So maybe Ingrid, you might be gifted your number 3. If we include something of a change.
But is a change in the CODA's physical or mental abilities, is the service competency the place for that? It feels like we have a whole other section in here about incompetent practice. Yes,
Which-
Patricia?
Hold it, Patricia.
That's kind of what I was going to say. I don't know that
Yeah.
I don't know that we could particularly can regulate morality and good ethics, because if an individual can't lift a patient, then presumably they've either communicated that to HR, or they've communicated that to their supervisor. It's not that they don't have the clinical competency to do it, it's that their physical status has changed. And then you run into, you know, as I say, some ethical considerations about is that something that they should, you know, be you know, required to make public, or if they have a doctor's note or whatever. It's kind of a morass that I don't know. I certainly don't think it belongs right here in these rules, because this part of the rules is just talking about what with regard to education, training, experience, and capability, what is this OTA capable of doing versus, oh, I broke my arm and so now I can't, you know, I can't do this, that, or the other thing on a temporary basis.
I agree. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. Clinical competency is different than physical ability at the moment. Perfect.
All right, so let's look at number 4 about the documentation. Date, description, name, signature, license number. Okay.
How do y'all feel about that?
I like it.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
I think it sounds good.
I mean, is there anything we need to add? Anything that's sort of outdated? Okay.
Does it need to say initial, ongoing and annual? I mean, any change basically.
Well, maybe like,
Or just documentation of all competencies.
yeah, I would say like,
Yeah.
or maybe competency documentation. All competency documentation shall include.
Okay.
And then Brenda reads it and will help.
I like that.
You know, my goal is to get out as many words as we can, but keep it clear. Okay, everybody comfortable with that? All right, number 5.
My only suggestion here would be to just delete the words initial and or annual.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Other than that, to me, it sounds good.
Should you put all service competencies, put all in front of the word service? So just help me here, because this is not my wheelhouse. Like, if Ingrid does the service competency on the CODA, and then I come in, say Ingrid goes out on vacation, this is basically saying that that one service competency is rules the intervention for when I'm supervising, right? Or if we're sharing responsibility.
That's right. You would not need to come in and redo service competencies.
Right. So once one is done, it's signed with the signature and license number, then it holds true for everyone that's supervising that assistant. Okay.
However, do we need to, I mean, is there somewhere it should be written that the PRN therapist should assure that the competency has been performed? Because you're then assuming responsibility?
What this, when I read this, it makes me think of like in a hospital situation where there might be 10 OTs and every OT is not going to assess all the codas that are working there. Once they're assessed, let's say by the lead OT, then everybody can be assured that they're competent, and only one person has to document that. So I would think that would go for anybody that would be coming in as PRN or anything like that, that they would be covered under that.
Exactly. And I think if the OT wanted to see it, that's addressed under number 6, where we have to talk about where is this documentation kept. Currently, we're saying that the documentation has to be maintained at each clinic site where the OTA practices. So, you know, if the PRN therapist comes in and needs to see it, then there it is.
Again, it's not my wheelhouse either, Darby, but in number 5, who is the there? Whose name, signature, and license number has to appear on the evaluation?
Yeah, I was going to ask that question because Carolyn mentioned something about like a lead OT, like.
It just
That's
says
actually
performed by one. So the one that did it, the one OT that did the competency.
And you know what? So the OTA has to have an OT signing off as their supervisor for the board. And it's going to be somebody that they work with, right? I mean, that's what it's supposed to be.
I don't know that we should limit it to the evaluating OT.
It doesn't actually, I don't think a competency has to be, well, maybe we need to go back and look at that. But does the competency have to be done by the person who is officially that CODA's supervisor? Or I guess I've always assumed that it could be done by any licensed OT that's working with that CODA, whether or not that CODA is that OT is the one signing off on that CODA's license.
Glenn, isn't this something that you had brought up in the past about having multiple supervisors and the CODAs and responsibility?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the CODA may have a supervising, like the one on their license in one clinic, but they can work for other companies where maybe that supervisor doesn't work there. I don't think we should limit it to that.
I don't either. So in that case, it's not necessarily the quote supervising OT, but whoever is the OT that actually evaluated the therapist, the CODA on that competency is the one signing off on the competency.
So, but didn't we already say that in number 4? I guess I just got confused by like, why are we specifying that there has to be somebody's name on the document?
Because we already said it in 4.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. And in 4, we're saying supervising, and do we mean that actually?
I read that as the one supervising the case, not necessarily supervising the license as a whole. For instance, if you did that eval and Darby came because you were on vacation, Darby is now supervising the assistant that's treating her patient.
Yeah, but we're not, but these are the competencies. This isn't an evaluation. I don't even like, you're evaluating the skills of the CODA. So maybe it's like all competency documentation shall include the date the evaluation of the CODA was performed, a description of the tasks evaluated, the name and signature and Louisiana license number of the evaluating OT conducting the service competency.
Right, because it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be your
doesn't have to be-
supervising therapist that's doing it.
Right.
Sometimes it may just be one person that says everybody's competency. Doesn't mean you're supervising that person. You're just saying that that person is competent, but it doesn't mean I'm supervising that person.
Exactly.
And do y'all call it the evaluation of the CODA or the OTA? Is it called like an evaluation? Like, is that the right word?
I don't even
I was
think,
wondering, Darby, is it not more of a skill assessment? And I think we use those words further up even.
Yeah,
I wish I had the paper document in front of me.
I would call it a service competency assessment, or the OT who's assessing the service competencies. Because I feel like evaluating gets back, like we define evaluation above as collecting data, interpreting data, whatnot of a client.
Yeah, I think we need to
I agree.
take out that word. And number one, under initial service competency, we say initially evaluate and document the OT assistant service competency. Is that what you're talking about, Brenda?
I don't have it small enough on my computer that I can scroll through it to
Yeah,
see.
it's under the initial. So when we finish this, we'll kind of go back and look at that because we do use the word evaluate and document. I'm going to step away for 1 second to turn the air on because it didn't come back on when I'm like starting to sweat.
where are we talking about up here? Number 1, following acceptance. Supervisor shall initially assess instead of evaluate. Is that what y'all were just saying?
Mhm.
Yeah. Semantics, they're all
Yep.
over in what we do.
That's what comes and that's what gets us. So are you assessing or are you like determining, or is it kind of the same word? Like, would that be a word that we would use? Like you determine what what areas they're competent in?
I think
Or
Or
assessment.
confirmed.
I feel
Deemed
like
competent,
assess,
you're deeming competent, I don't know, competency.
Well, I've got assess in there all over the place right now.
I like assess because that assessment would show yes where they're competent and no where they're not.
I think assess is also puts less of a detrimental reliance potential if you confirm, deem, mandate that this person, what you're saying is based on what I see in my education, training, and experience, I think this person is competent to do that, but it's not, but that's just a good faith about assessment versus writing it in a stone tablet. I deem as a matter of law that this person is competent to do whatever, and then you end up with a negligent assessment, case on you.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Okay, so since we already talked about this license name and all that, did we need to have that again under number 5 in practice settings where it's performed by one, all surface competence performed by one, not supervising, but maybe even licensed. OT will satisfy the requirements for all OTs supervising.
For all supervising OTs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of redundant. You're right.
Yeah. But
Or if anything, to maybe just throw in between all in service, put all documented service competencies.
okay, where are we? Say it again.
Right there.
Yeah.
Just so y'all know, Glenn's mic's not working, so he's putting stuff in the chat and I'm monitoring that, so that's fine.
Okay.
Because of that, Ingrid, can you increase the size of your screen a little bit? Because with the chat open now, I can't read your screen. A little bit more. I feel like I'm in an eye exam.
I know, Darby, I'm not sure what, it's Darby's computer, y'all. She sees everything minuscule.
Well, in part of it's now because I have the chat open, which I want to include Glenn, and so that made your screen even smaller. And I'm like, okay, now I can't. Dang.
And thank you, Darby, because my eyes are old.
Yeah. I have another screen with it up there, and so that's how I refer to it. But anyway, now I'm looking at hers, but just trying to keep Glenn involved too because his mic isn't working. Okay.
Okay, so number 5 now says, in practice settings where an OTA is supervised by more than one OT, all documented service competencies performed by one OT will satisfy the requirements of this section for all OTs supervising the OTA in the performance of the same services, provided that the assessing OT's name, signature, and Louisiana license number appears on the competency.
Beautiful. And that ensures their license since their number has to be on it.
Right.
Yes. Okay, now we're talking about where it's being kept. Which again puts everything on the OT. Shouldn't the OTA have to?
This says that they have to maintain it, and then the place where we're providing this also has to maintain it.
So again, think about when these rules were written, everything was paper.
Right.
True.
So just remember that. So, I mean, think about the settings that you've worked in, like whether it's hospital, think about the rural settings that people may be in, early intervention, schools, whatever, like what would make sense and where would it need to be so that like if I'm coming in as say a substituting OT that I would have access to it. Like that's kind of the things that cross my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like this does a good job actually. So like the assistant should have access to it so that if they need to produce it to their supervising OT at the time, and the supervising OT can come in and say, okay, you're asking me to supervise these 3 CODAs because I'm PRN at a SNF or whatever. So I want to see the documentation for these guys. So it kind of requires both.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of clinic, should we take out at each clinic, or should it be? Because like that wouldn't hold true like in a school setting or like a home health thing. Like, I don't know if that word at each clinic, I don't know if it should be at each setting because, you know, it's not going to be at somebody's house.
Could
Like,
it say practice
I think
location?
setting works.
I do too. Or also,
but it's not going to be
again, in this e-world, you know, does it need to be at the setting? Does it need to be accessible to?
Glenn's comment is that what if the focus of where is eliminated, but the focus is more on how it is kept, like safe, secure manner to protect like PHI.
And is accessible to a supervising OT at any time.
That's what I think is important, because when you said setting, even setting, like if I go into someone's home, it's not going to be at that setting. Like, I think it needs to be accessible in a HIPAA compliant or whatever language we need to put there so that it's accessible, basically.
Accessible by the supervising OT?
Yes, right. So like if I'm filling in or I'm newly hired or whatever the situation is, that I can say, okay, wait, let me check your competencies, right? Because that's my responsibility. True.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So
But
like,
my question is then whose responsibility is it to have that documentation accessible? Is it the CODA's responsibility to have all the competencies that have been done on them accessible to any OT who supervises them?
I think yes, but I don't supervise CODAs, but
I think it would be the responsibility of the CODA.
I mean, say for instance, like I go into a school and they say, I need a copy of your license and your liability insurance. Like that's on me, right? So it would kind of be the same thing of like, hey, I need a copy. They should be able to, I mean, I don't know if having it like on their phone or email would, it'd have to be a HIPAA compliant, perhaps. I mean, I guess it'd be their choice, but getting to what Glenn says of, I mean, the PHI information, I don't know, like.
Well, there
But
shouldn't be PHI on that
On
competency,
PHI.
right? It's just the
it would be their
payment,
name, it would be their information, right? The
just
OTA information,
their skill set.
Yeah, but no
Yes.
health information.
right? But so it would just say the evaluation, description of the task, the name, signature, and license of the supervising. So the name of the supervising person would also be on there, and their license number.
But it's not the same thing as PHI. I have no idea if we need to be concerned about having someone's skill sets be maintained in a private thing. I guess like any employee assessment, like my annual performance appraisal, that should be locked up. But so I guess it needs, but if the CODA is the one responsible for keeping their own service competencies, then and they're the ones that need to be responsible for making available to any OT who's going to supervise them for the day.
Correct. Yeah.
Could we just add that in? So such documentation is maintained by the occupational assistant and made available to all, or made accessible to all assisting, all supervising OTs upon their request.
Yeah.
I like that.
Glenn's comment was that he thinks it's more of a personal portability of the person's own document is what he's saying. So yeah. So it's the same thing of the OT should the OTA should have access in case they're asked to produce it or for the OT to review it. So I think you take out that bottom part of like,
Right.
yeah.
The only thing that gets worrisome there is, say that an OT was under audit for whatever reason and someone was looking for competency information, and that CODA is no longer working with that OT, can no longer provide it. Where does the OT have protection that was done at some point in time?
So that probably gets back to where it's saying that it's maintained at the clinic. So
Yeah.
do we need to say something also like available at facilities, or copies also maintained at the?
I liked what you called it, like service location, or location at which the services are being provided.
Yeah, but that could be a house. Like, so their company, you know what I mean? Like back into the records of the employer, maybe a copy with the employer. Cause like I go into schools and homes, so we're not gonna have a copy there, but it would be like at my office.
I like that. The employer.
Glenn has in the chat that each person should keep a copy of the competency. So maybe more alluding to the fact that the supervising therapist should keep a copy. Like the onus should be on me as the therapist to keep a copy in case I'm going to need it. And I think it's a whole different ball of wax, like if the clinic or the hospital, whatever, keep it. I think that's more their regulations.
But how do we show that we kept a copy? Like if we came into, if Darby came in to PRN to help cover an OT in a hospital-based setting, and it's a massive hospital, there's 7 CODAs, that would be a lot. Okay, so there's 3 or 4 that she's supervising. Does she then on that day have to gather those documentations and house it personally? Like that part gets I like the idea of the employer because that if it's a entrepreneur like a 1099 OT out doing their own thing, they still have to house it somewhere. Same as if it's a facility or home health agency, the whole shebang.
They
I think
need
we
that
are-
for
I think
joint
we are back
commissions.
to-
They have to do that. They have to have that.
What if we put like something about like having access to it for, and then maybe like, you know, how we have to keep records for say 5 to 7 years or something, so that like if the CODA does leave and something comes up later, then we would be able to have access. Glenn's saying each person could keep a copy, employer, OT, and CODA. But again, I think that goes to Elisa's comment of like, I don't want to keep a copy of 7 people if I supervise them for one time. Like,
No, I think we're back to almost like our original wording, really.
I know, but I
Talking
don't think
about.
that each clinic is appropriate. That's the original wording at each
Well,
clinic.
I just changed it to each site or agency. Service competency documentation is maintained by the OTA and made accessible to all supervising OTs upon request at each site or agency.
I think that leaves it gray enough to cover it yet. Because like I think I heard the original question come up of what if something happens down the road and the OT, to prevent their personal liability, needs to produce that they had it. But we need to remember that we're writing this to protect the patient.
Right.
So I think it's gray enough to protect everybody and still say what should happen to it.
I think it definitely needs to be on site because what if both the OT and the CODA are gone and then CARF or JCAH comes in to do their annual audit and they're going, okay, well, there's an issue with this patient. Where's all this documentation?
I agree, Cam. So maybe Ingrid, we could just put something that you said at the beginning instead of each clinic, just and also at the site/facility or something, to where it is at like the official gatekeeper where the records are kept.
That original language says clinic, facility, or home health agency, so it kind of encompasses there, huh?
Yeah.
I just changed it to site because also just OT is moving towards away from everything being in clinics and facilities. There's going to be more kinds of places where OT is provided, including might be an OTA. You might be a homeless shelter. You know, there's going to be places. So that's why I thought site would be a little bit more generic.
So would that say the homeless shelter should have it, or?
No, this would basically saying like the employer, I think, is my interpretation. Like wherever the medical records are kept, there would be a copy of it there.
Because it says or agency, so just the whole company could have it, even if it's online, then they can pull it up and it's.
They would have access.
Did y'all screen just go black?
No.
No.
Maybe your power went out. No, I'm kidding.
No, I know, but now I've got lights, huh?
Would it be helpful at all? Does it assist in the inquiry at all to link it to the entity billing for the services has to maintain a copy or something? Does that?
No, not for this.
Okay, because I just was trying to think, it might not be an employer, it might not be an individual, you know, it could be an individual, it could be a whatever. I was just trying to think of something that wasn't limiting, but yeah, no, that's fine.
So should we put like, instead of just site or agency at the employer site or agency, or the you know, to make it seem like it's not at, I don't want it to be like Elise said, like would it have to be at the homeless shelter? Like, no, it would be wherever the medical records are kept. Because even if you do online, like medical records, they're still housed somewhere. Like you would still like, you know, that one place has access to the medical records.
I like the employer because
the employer
assistants can never operate without a supervising OT.
Right.
So
at each employing site or agency.
I like that.
Or site or agency of the employer.
Do we want to keep that language where the assistant is practicing?
What do you mean where, like who they're employed by? Not meaning like at the homeless shelter, but meaning like at the office? Like is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
I guess I'm imagining like the bigger companies where that assistant might be providing services at like 4 or 5 locations. I guess still the big employer would house it.
So it would
And
be at
as
the
long as it's
employer, not where they're
to
practicing.
the,
Ingrid, do
yeah,
you see
you're
the
right.
difference?
You're right.
Because you put is practicing, but it would be like is employed.
Darby, I know y'all been struggling with this. We're now at 3 hours.
Yeah, I was about to say, we have to
And
wrap it up.
We have
And
10 minutes.
I have to say that at 1 o'clock, I need this Zoom account or else I got to go to another meeting. So
Yeah,
I would-
it ends at 1. Thank you. I'm watching. We have 10 minutes. I'm hoping to get through D and then we're going to call it a day.
okay. But at 1 o'clock, I got to turn y'all off. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
And we gotta vote for them.
We want to be turned off at 1.
All right. I'll be happy to.
Okay. So let's read through this, how it's written, and see if we're okay with it.
Well, and I've just put employed twice.
You can take off employing, maybe.
Yeah, take off the employing site at the request
There you go.
at each site or agency where the assistant is employed.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's clear that it's accessible to everyone, and then there's a database of it somewhere for, okay. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to D quickly. A supervising occupational therapist is responsible for and must be capable of demonstrating compliance with the requirements of this chapter and AOTA supervision guidelines respecting supervision of occupational therapy assistants. So that's basically saying if things sort of change and the rules aren't updated, we still have a AOTA supervision guideline compliancy.
Yeah, we still have to adhere to their most current guidelines. I like it.
Yeah, so. Anyone else have any comments about that?
I think it's good and clear.
Yeah.
All right, should we vote on the changes before we get booted off?
Well, yeah, but I just want to ask real quick, is it still called the AOTA supervision guidelines? Is that still the current name of the document?
Yeah. I
Okay.
think-
All right. Okay.
April 14.
All right. So that includes the changes to section 4919. If anyone would motion that we accept the changes made to section 4919.
I make a motion to accept them. This is Carolyn.
Carolyn,
You will second.
that was
Amy.
Amy.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. All right, then, Dr. Van, can you please check for any public comments?
There is no public comments and the next meeting is planned for April 14th. Is everybody still in agreement with that?
That's correct, 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock.
All right. Thank
All right.
you.
We will officially adjourn at 12:53. Thank you, and thank you, Elise, for participating today.
Yes, thank you. Bye,
Thanks
y'all.
for welcoming. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.